You think that you can say that Pink Floyd is the best band ever, and then the Beatles?
I don't know. No, the Beatles are the best.
David Gilmour transformed the sound of psychedelic rock with Pink Floyd, but the music that shaped him came from some surprising sources. The legendary guitarist and vocalist has always been private about his personal musical preferences, but over the years, he has revealed the 5 bands that influenced him most deeply. These artists didn't just provide entertainment. They became the foundation for his approach to music, songwriting, and guitar playing. The Beatles, revolutionary studio innovation. David Gilmour has never hidden his admiration for the Beatles and their massive impact on his musical development. Long before he became known for Pink Floyd's experimental soundscapes, Gilmour was a teenager captivated by the revolutionary music of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. He once said simply, "I really like the Beatles. They were massive for me." This statement reveals both his personal taste and the foundation of his musical ambitions. The Beatles didn't just change popular music, they completely redefined what an album could be. For Gilmour, their innovations in studio production, songwriting structure, and sound manipulation opened up entirely new possibilities. Their middle and later period albums, especially Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the White Album, expanded what rock music could sound like. Instead of being limited by radio-friendly formulas or rigid musical styles, the Beatles painted with an ever-widening palette of sounds, and Gilmour was paying close attention. Gilmour and Pink Floyd would later follow a similar path, moving far beyond the bluesy, psychedelic jams of their early years under Syd Barrett to create expansive conceptual masterpieces like The Dark Side of the Moon in 1973 and Wish You Were Here in 1970. These albums didn't simply copy the Beatles, they continued the evolution that thus Beatles had started. Pink Floyd's use of tape loops, synthesizers, non-linear song structures, and thematic unity can be traced back to the template created by Beatles producer George Martin and the band during their Abbey Road years. One thing Gilmour particularly admired about the Beatles was their courage to innovate. They weren't afraid to take risks, abandon successful formulas, and push themselves creatively, even if it meant some fans might not understand. That artistic bravery became central to Pink Floyd's identity as well. Albums like Animals in 1977 and The Wall in 1979 weren't just musically daring. They tackled complex psychological, political, and philosophical themes, just as the Beatles had begun doing with tracks like A Day in the Life and Eleanor Rigby. Gilmour's love for the Beatles wasn't just theoretical admiration. It showed up in his live performances, too. He has performed Beatles classics like Here, There, and Everywhere, a melodic McCartney ballad from Revolver that shows Gilmour's appreciation for both vocal harmony and emotional songwriting. He's also covered Revolution, John Lennon's politically charged song that combined distorted guitar with a message of social unrest, a combination Gilmour would later master in his own work. These covers were more than just tributes. They were acknowledgments of debt, respect, and musical kinship. Gilmour didn't see the Beatles as distant legends. He saw them as fellow explorers and guiding lights who opened the door to ambitious music making. Even in Gilmour's solo work, their influence can be heard. His sense of melody, lyrical introspection, and atmospheric arrangements often resemble McCartney's ballads or Harrison's layered guitar work. The Beatles essentially gave Gilmour permission to be both a guitarist and a composer, to chase emotional depth and technical mastery at the same time. Perhaps most importantly, Gilmour absorbed the Beatles' belief in the album as a complete artistic statement. Just as Sgt. Pepper's had been designed to be experienced as a single work of art, Gilmour helped steer Pink Floyd into that same conceptual territory, treating each album not as a collection of separate tracks, but as a cinematic journey. From the ticking clocks of time to the mechanical sounds of Welcome to the Machine, that Beatles-inspired commitment to atmosphere, continuity, and narrative became a defining element of the Pink Floyd experience. The Shadows, the foundation of guitar melody. While many music fans trace David Gilmour's musical roots to the psychedelic surge of the late 1960s or Pink Floyd's conceptual revolution, his earliest and perhaps most lasting influence came from a band that existed before the British invasion, the Shadows. Long before the Beatles conquered America and Pink Floyd built their sonic pyramids in the studio, the Shadows were creating a distinctly British instrumental sound that would quietly shape a generation of guitarists, including Gilmour. Formed in the late 1950s, the Shadows were best known as Cliff Richard's backing band, but they quickly gained independent fame with instrumental hits like Apache, Wonderful Land, and FEI. Their music had no vocals, yet it overflowed with atmosphere, tone, and unforgettable melodies. For young Gilmour, growing up in Cambridge, the Shadows were revolutionary. He wasn't just listening to music, he was absorbing a new kind of guitar language. At the center of that language was Hank Marvin, the Shadows' lead guitarist, and an undisputed icon in early British rock. With his signature red Fender Stratocaster and echo-drenched phrasing, Marvin created a sound that was clean, precise, and full of emotional nuance. Unlike the chaotic blues players who would follow, Marvin's playing wasn't about distortion or raw aggression. It was about clarity and feeling, and that resonated deeply with Gilmour. Over the years, Gilmour has spoken enthusiastically about the Shadows, naming their greatest hits album as one of his all-time favorites. "It's all about melody," he once said, highlighting how the band's simplicity and musical storytelling left a permanent mark on his playing style. The Shadows didn't need a wall of sound or complex arrangements. With just a few notes and the right tone, they could create a cinematic mood, a skill that Gilmour would later develop into an art form. In many ways, the Shadows laid the emotional foundation for Gilmour's guitar work. Songs like Shine on You, Crazy Diamond, or Comfortably Numb are not just guitar showcases. They're emotional statements where every note is carefully placed to serve the feeling of the song. That's a direct inheritance from Hank Marvin's minimalist, almost vocal-like approach to lead guitar. Gilmour once said that the spaces between notes were as important as the notes themselves, a philosophy that echoes the Shadows' use of silence, echo, and phrasing. What set the Shadows apart, and what Gilmour so admired, was their use of atmosphere and restraint. At a time when most guitarists sought to impress with speed or volume, Marvin and his bandmates created depth through subtlety. That sense of control and tone coloring would become a hallmark of Gilmour's own style. From his slow, bending solos on High Hopes to the melancholy phrasing in Marooned, the Shadows' influence is unmistakable. The Shadows were also pioneers in their own right. They were among the first British rock bands to embrace the electric guitar as a lead instrument, not just a rhythmic tool. In doing so, they opened the door for the guitar heroes of the next 2 decades, Gilmour included. The Shadows' clean tones and sense of melody helped bridge the gap between instrumental rock and cinematic music. Their sound could be moody, triumphant, lonely, or playful, all without a single lyric. Gilmour absorbed that dynamic approach and later brought it to life in Pink Floyd's instrumental passages and soundscapes. For Gilmour, his admiration for the Shadows isn't just nostalgic. It's foundational. He has never stopped crediting them as the spark that lit his musical path. Even as his own playing grew more sophisticated, more effects-laden, and more expansive, he never abandoned the core principles he learned from Hank Marvin. Melody matters, tone is everything, and one perfectly placed note can speak louder than 20 fast ones. Dire Straits, the art of understated excellence. Though David Gilmour is widely celebrated for his soaring solos and immersive soundscapes, his admiration for tasteful, understated musicianship has remained constant, and few modern bands exemplified that as clearly as Dire Straits. Gilmour has expressed deep respect for the band's 1978 self-titled debut album, which introduced the world to a completely different kind of guitar heroism, one that emphasized feel, tone, and storytelling over flash or volume. From the opening track down to the waterline, Dire Straits signaled they were doing something different. With crisp arrangements, clean tones, and deceptively complex rhythm work, the band offered a refreshing alternative to the bloated, distortion-heavy rock that had come to dominate the late 1970s. For Gilmour, who always favored melodic precision and emotional phrasing over technical showing off, this approach struck a chord. He praised the band's subtle, intricate arrangements and how they carved emotional depth out of quiet restraint rather than sonic overload. Central to that sound was Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits' frontman and lead guitarist. Knopfler's fingerstyle technique, unusual in rock contexts, gave his playing a fluidity and nuance that instantly set him apart. Gilmour, himself a master of nuanced phrasing, was captivated. In one interview, Gilmour remarked that Knopfler brought back something that seemed to have gone astray in guitar playing. It was a pointed comment, not just praise, but a critique of rock guitar at the time, which often prioritized flashiness over substance. In Knopfler's hands, the guitar once again became a narrative voice, not a weapon of dominance, but a tool for emotional storytelling. Gilmour's admiration extended beyond Knopfler's playing. He saw Dire Straits as a cohesive unit whose power lay in clarity, discipline, and unspoken chemistry. The rhythm section, featuring John Illsley on bass and Pick Withers on drums, anchored the band with quiet confidence, allowing the melodies to breathe. Gilmour appreciated that restraint. He knew from experience that playing less with more intention often made a stronger impact than a flurry of notes. The debut album was a masterclass in minimalism with feeling. Tracks like Sultans of Swing became radio staples, but what stood out to musicians like Gilmour wasn't the popularity. It was the craftsmanship. That song showcased Knopfler's ability to weave narrative lyrics with effortlessly expressive guitar lines. It told a story, evoked a mood, and never once relied on distortion or studio gimmicks. Gilmour, whose own guitar solos often function as emotional arcs within larger narratives, recognized in Knopfler a kindred spirit who understood the storytelling power of a single bend or perfectly timed harmonic. Gilmour also admired the production quality of Dire Straits' early work. There was an honesty to it, a dryness in the mix that made every instrument feel intimate and exposed, yet balanced. Nothing was overproduced or buried under layers of effects. This transparency allowed each player's contribution to shine, and it demanded discipline from the musicians. As someone who spent years crafting Pink Floyd's Sonic Worlds, Gilmour valued that kind of stripped-down purity where every sound had a purpose. Beyond technical admiration, Gilmour seemed to appreciate what Dire Straits represented artistically. At a time when punk was exploding and arena rock was ballooning into excess, Dire Straits were quietly revolutionary, doing more by playing less and insisting that melody, tone, and restraint still had a place in rock's evolving landscape. They didn't follow trends. They followed the song. That philosophy resonated with Gilmour, who had always balanced Pink Floyd's massive sound with a deep commitment to musical feeling and narrative integrity. Cream, bold experimentation and musical freedom. Though Cream is most commonly associated with Eric Clapton's guitar work, their influence extended far beyond one musician's playing. For David Gilmour, Cream's power lay in their collective boldness, a trio of musicians who rewrote the rules for what a rock band could sound like. Long before Pink Floyd became synonymous with sprawling concept albums and spacey soundscapes, Cream helped unlock the possibilities of blues rock improvisation and sonic experimentation. Gilmour has acknowledged Cream as a crucial stepping stone, not just in British rock history, but in his own artistic development. While their sound was heavier, more aggressive, and more grounded in American blues tradition than what Pink Floyd would ultimately create, Gilmour admired them for something deeper: their fearlessness. Albums like Disraeli Gears in 1967 and Wheels of Fire in 1968 weren't just records. They were statements of liberation, full of extended jams, unconventional song structures, and raw, untamed energy that was rare in the tightly controlled studio output of the time. Cream's ability to stretch the limits of a song, to take a riff and ride it through shifting moods, time signatures, and emotional peaks, was something Gilmour paid close attention to. While Pink Floyd's take on improvisatis on was more atmospheric and methodical, Gilmour saw Cream's loose, live-wire energy as a spark that encouraged a generation of musicians to experiment without apology. Their live performances, particularly captured on the Wheels of Fire double album, showed that audiences would follow if the journey was honest and the musicianship undeniable. Much of Gilmour's admiration came from the trio's dynamic chemistry. Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker weren't just three excellent players, they were three distinct forces, constantly pushing and reacting to one another. In songs like Spoonful or Crossroads, the interplay between Clapton's blues licks, Bruce's jazz-influenced bass lines, and Baker's thunderous drumming created a kinetic, ever-evolving storm of sound. Gilmour, who would later contribute to similarly immersive compositions like Echoes and Shine on You, Crazy Diamond, understood the value of trusting the moment, of letting the music stretch, breathe, and find its own shape in real time. Gilmour especially praised Cream's willingness to blend genres. Tracks like Tales of Brave Ulysses combined mythic imagery with swirling psychedelic textures, while Sunshine of Your Love merged blues grit with hypnotic, almost proto-metal riffing. This genre-blending approach opened the door for progressive rock outfits like Pink Floyd to imagine music as something unbound by categories. The walls between blues, jazz, rock, and classical could fall if a band was brave enough to knock them down. And Cream knocked them down with both force and finesse. One of the most direct parallels between Gilmour and Clapton's work in Cream lies in their shared belief in emotional clarity over technical excess. While Clapton could certainly dazzle with speed and precision, his best work, like Gilmour's, relied on feel, timing, and expressive phrasing. Gilmour saw in Clapton a kind of blues minimalism that spoke volumes with fewer notes, especially on tracks like Deserted Cities of the Heart. It wasn't just about what you played, it was about how you played it. Fleetwood Mac. The Peter Green era's emotional depth. Long before Fleetwood Mac became synonymous with polished California pop rock and global chart domination in the Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham era, they were something entirely different. A raw, emotionally charged British blues outfit led by the quietly brilliant Peter Green. For David Gilmour, this early incarnation of the band wasn't just a footnote in music history, it was a profound inspiration. Gilmour has often spoken with deep admiration for the early Fleetwood Mac of the late 1960s, especially when Peter Green was at the creative helm. Far removed from the polished harmonies of Rumours, the Peter Green-led Mac was steeped in moody blues, dark lyricism, and expressive guitar work that placed emotional resonance above showmanship. It was this haunting, melancholic tone that captured Gilmour's attention and imagination. Gilmour has described the music of this early Mac period as haunting and beautiful, a rare combination that resonated deeply with his own evolving musical instincts. While Pink Floyd would later travel through psychedelia, progressive rock, and experimental sound design, the emotional core of Gilmour's guitar work, slow-building, melodic, and introspective, can be traced back in part to Peter Green's influence. Green's playing wasn't about flash or speed. It was about feeling every note. That sensibility found a home in Gilmour's approach as well, particularly in tracks like Shine on You, Crazy Diamond, or Comfortably Numb, where the guitar becomes a voice of sorrow, hope, and introspection. One standout example of Green's genius that Gilmour has praised is the 1969 album Then Play On, widely regarded as the artistic high point of Fleetwood Mac's early years. The album showcased the band's ability to merge blues tradition with more ambitious, emotionally layered songwriting. TR. Acts like Oh Well, Coming Your Way, and the instrumental Albatross displayed a musical atmosphere that was not only evocative but deeply cinematic, something that surely appealed to Gilmour's sense of mood and pacing. Peter Green's tone particularly stood out. He favored a warm, rounded, almost vocal-like guitar sound that was far removed from the heavily distorted, aggressive blues playing of many of his peers. His signature Les Paul sound, often played through a simple amp setup with little to no effects, achieved an intimacy and depth that mirrored Gilmour's later work. For Gilmour, tone wasn't just technical, it was spiritual. Green's ability to make a note linger and ache, to say more in silence than in a flurry of notes, offered a blueprint for a different kind of guitar heroism based on emotional clarity. Gilmour also admired the emotional honesty in Peter Green's songwriting. Songs like Man of the World and Need Your Love So Bad are steeped in vulnerability, often expressing loneliness, mental anguish, and longing. There's no rock star bravado, just naked, melancholic truth. Gilmour, whose lyrics and solos often convey alienation, disillusionment, and existential themes, found in Green a kindred spirit. Both guitarists speak to the quiet internal struggles of the human condition, not just with words, but with every sustained note. The tragedy of Peter Green's personal battles and his eventual withdrawal from the music scene only added to the mystique. Gilmour, like many others, has often spoken with reverence about Green's brilliance and sensitivity, lamenting that such a uniquely expressive voice in blues was silenced too soon. Yet the echoes of that voice carried forward into the slow, aching bends of Gilmour's solos and into the mood-driven guitar arrangements that defined Pink Floyd's golden years. These five bands, the Beatles, the Shadows, Dire Straits, Cream, and early Fleetwood Mac, represent the diverse musical foundation that shaped David Gilmour's approach to music. From the Beatles' studio innovation to the Shadows' melodic restraint, from Dire Straits' understated excellence to Cream's bold experimentation, and from Peter Green's emotional depth, each contributed essential elements to what would become Gilmour's distinctive musical voice. Together they demonstrate that great artists don't emerge in isolation, but build upon the work of those who came before, transforming influences into something uniquely their own.